Welcome to our talk. We're going to be talking about green space and realizing the connections between humans and the environment. I'm Dr. Staci Forgey, and I'm joined by Lynette Hauser today, Dr. Lynette Hauser. We both teach environmental science as well as biology, so a lot of this is kind of related to what we would teach in environmental science classes, where we do a lot of talking about the overlap between science and sociology concepts almost, and some of these human issues related to environmentalism. Oops, sorry. Sorry. Lynette, did you want to talk about this or?
Sure.
Okay.
So if we are going to be talking about the connection between humans and the environment and trying to connect with green space, we should probably give you a definition of what green space is. So we're going to say that open land that has been undeveloped, that no buildings, no other built structures, readily accessible to the public, right? Doesn't have a fence around it or anything like that. And as part of open space, we can get a little bit more specific and say, well, that open space could be specifically green space. And so that is going to include greenery. It could be grass or trees or shrubs or flowers or some combination of all of the above. And there's been research, and if you spent any time in green space yourself, you're probably aware that it can have some benefits such as recreation opportunities, which we'll talk about, just beautification, making the area look nicer. And then we have these opportunities to connect with nature, and those connections with nature can be very rewarding.
Okay. So the next thing that I wanted to ask in this talk today is a little bit about human population. So one of the things that really occurred to me when we were talking about this connection between humans and the environment is that really we're talking about human population. And so I wanted to ask this question about whether we think human population size can grow and keep growing the way that it has been historically. So there's actually a lot of discussion about this, as we'll see in a second, about whether humans are so smart we can kind of develop technology that means that we will be able to keep growing in size for a long period of time, or is that something that just doesn't really happen and isn't really feasible for human population. So I put together this poll. I realize there's only a couple of us here live today, which is fine. But I was just asking, can human population grow forever? So do we think, yeah, humans are pretty smart, we'll be able to figure things out? Or do we think, probably not, like we're going to run out of resources, something's going to happen that slows down population growth and keeps the human population from growing that way? So I realize that there's just a couple of us, so I'll go ahead and end that poll, I think, at this point. So we had probably not. And what I wanted to talk about next related to this is, what does population ecology tell us about populations over time? So when we look at populations, whether we're talking about populations of other animals or plants or humans, there's two different types of growth curves that result for organisms. There's this one on the left-hand side that's called an exponential growth curve. And really what this means mathematically is that populations keep increasing pretty rapidly throughout time. And if we're thinking about what the limit to this growth is, there really isn't one for a true exponential growth curve. It just kind of keeps increasing and increasing, and it actually has a characteristic doubling time, or a characteristic amount of time that it takes for the population to double in size. So we might talk about a population where they double in size every 2 months. That means every 2 months that population has the ability to increase in size, it double its population size in that time frame. On the right-hand side is logistic growth curve. And with a logistic growth curve, what happens is the population kind of starts out looking like an exponential growth curve, but it gets to a certain point and the environment just cannot support any more individuals above that level. So that level there is called the carrying capacity for the environment. It's the maximum number of individuals that the environment can support. And we've seen that human population kind of increases to that level, or populations increase to that level, and then it kind of like goes up and down around that carrying capacity. So a lot of this discussion related to human population size is which one of these happens with human populations. We'll look at human population growth in a second here. But population ecologists also recognize that in other populations, exponential growth doesn't occur forever. That something happens at some point that slows down that population growth. So sometimes it can be things like disease. Sometimes it's stuff like crowding or competition for resources. Maybe it's access to safe places to nest for other types of animals, but something slows down that population growth. And so if we then look at human population over time, this figure here is showing us the population of the world, and then it breaks it down by the different continents. And if we looked at this growth curve, we would say, this looks like it's exponential population growth, right, for the world population over time. And so that is part of what a lot of population ecologists are concerned about, especially as this relates to environmental interactions. Human population has increased pretty rapidly, and especially since the Industrial Revolution, if we look at this, it's been growing really rapidly. And, it looks like an exponential growth curve, and we know that it cannot keep increasing like this forever, right? It's pretty likely that something will happen that will slow down this human population growth. Now, the other thing that I wanted to kind of point out related to human population growth is that the time that it takes to add another billion has been getting kind of faster and faster, but is actually slowing down a little bit in more recent times. So it took all of human history to 1800 to get to 1 billion people on Earth. It took us 130 years to get to 2 billion, 30 years to get to 3 billion, 15 years to get to 4 billion, 12 years to make it to 5 billion, 12 years to 6, 13 years to 7. They're predicting that in 16 years we'll be at 8 billion people on Earth, and then it will take 16 years from 7 billion, we would get to 8 billion. And then 9 billion, it would take us 26 years to get to 9 billion. But when we look at this chart that shows us the time to add 1 billion more people, we can add 1 billion people in 12, 20 years now, where, historically that wasn't true. So if we're thinking about human interaction with the environment, this is something that we really have to consider, that human population is growing very rapidly. We're adding 1 billion more people in short time frames, and certainly the more people on Earth, the more strain there is on the environment and environmental resources. Another thing that I like to talk about related to this with human population is a little bit about age structure, and what happens with, it's called the demographic transition theory, and then kind of looking at these different areas of the world and their growth rate. So up at the top, what this diagram is showing us is it shows us the age structure for populations, and each of these stages are stages of what we call the demographic transition theory. So what that means is that a country goes through different stages of economic development. And as they go through stages of economic development, we've seen that their population growth is kind of changing as their economic development occurs. And it's sort of happened in this predictable pattern that we see up at the top with stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. Where a population, as its economy is kind of like agriculturally based, they're sort of farming for their own survival, they would have this very like pyramid shape with rapid growth in stage 1. And then as they start to become more economically developed, it starts to slow down And then as they transition into industrial and post-industrial societies where they really are relying heavily on industry, their population slows down some. And then stage 4, they actually call this the post-industrial society. There are developed countries in the world that have gone through economic development and are actually shrinking in size. So if we look at this map on the bottom, it shows us the growth rates for different countries. And you can see that some of these countries have slow or even negative growth in some places. So if we look at the United States, we fall in that 0 to 1% growth in population. We're really slowing down and stabilizing. Japan is also kind of slowing down, stabilizing. They actually have some social issues related to this where a lot of workers and their workforce are, hold on one second, are having to stay in the workforce for a really long time before they can retire because there's just not younger people to replace them. So their population is kind of slowing. But if we look at some of these other countries here, there are places where there are really high growth rates. So one of the things that I like to talk about related to human population growth is the fact that a lot of the population growth is going to be taking place in these developing countries. And as they transition through economic development, we anticipate that their population growth will kind of speed up, right? They're gonna grow faster and faster. So relating this to environmental issues, right? The problem is that you have a lot of people in developing countries, they don't use a lot of resources typically, but if they start to transition through economic development and their populations start to grow pretty rapidly, they will need more and more resources. But as we know, most of the resources are already being used by the developed world, right? These countries that have really slow growth rates use most of the world's resources. So relating to our connection with the environment, this is part of the issue, right? The wealthiest countries have the slowest growth rates, they consume the most. These countries that are transitioning through economic development have rapid growth rates and don't have enough resources. And so that certainly plays a role as well in this connection between humans and the environment. And it's likely to continue to become more and more stressed. So what I wanted to do next before we talk about some of the other concepts related to our connection with the environment is I like to take an opportunity to sort of think about a place in nature, so a green space, right, that you have a connection with. So somewhere that you connect with currently or some time in your past that you connected with an outdoor space. And I'd like you to just think about where was it? So where was that space that you connected with? Why did you feel a connection to that place? What was it about that place that made you really feel that connection? And then also reflect a little bit on, is that place still there? Is it still somewhere that you could visit if you wanted to? So we'll take a few minutes and just let you guys kind of think through this about an outdoor space that you connect with. And while we're waiting, we were going to bring up just a video. Oh, I have to do a new share. Just a video to help you kind of think about different spaces. Okay, so we had a couple of minutes there to think about an outdoor space and where it was, what connection we felt to that place, and whether it was still there. Does anyone want to share what they thought about, what place they really thought about when they were thinking about a connection they have with an outdoor space? Okay, I see I have something in the chat. Okay, so the beach, certainly I think probably for a lot of people, the beach would be an outdoor space. Is there a particular reason why you connect with the beach? The ocean is soothing, yeah. For me, I know that the beach makes me feel small. And for me, that's a really important feeling because it reminds me that like everything isn't about me, that I'm a very small piece in this larger planet. So like that feeling of smallness for me is actually a really good feeling and something that lets me kind of remind myself of my place. Anyone else feel like sharing either in chat or by speaking up? I know it's kind of a touchy-feely kind of question. Oh, that's weird. Someone was having trouble with the Zoom link. I'm not sure why that is. I'll share with you guys quickly. So when I was asked this question before, when I was a student and I was thinking about it, my place is right next to my house where I grew up in Western New York. We had a little crab apple orchard, and there were 3 very large boulders in that space. And I used to make my sisters sit through summer school and those rocks, and I would teach them school all summer long when we were out of school. But it became like my little outdoor classroom in my time with my sisters. And I'm sure they have very fond memories of my school next to our house, but that was a place that I really felt a strong connection with. And it's actually not still there. So the beach, obviously, that's somewhere that's really constant and is, always there. But I've heard lots of people answered this question with, stories of their favorite tree that they used to climb, or a specific park that they like to go to. And for a lot of folks, those places actually just aren't there anymore, which, kind of evokes some strong feelings that way as well. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about today is I wanted to have a little bit of discussion about this concept called biophilia. This is something that totally fascinates me. And I'm very interested in biophilia. And actually, most of the time we credit E.O. Wilson. He is a very prominent ecologist in today's world. We credit him with the idea of biophilia, but actually, it had been around for about 20 years before he had started discussing it, with Erich Fromm, where he talked about this attachment to life. And even before him, there's mention of Aristotle discussing biophilia as a love of life. So whether we're talking about Aristotle or Fromm or E.O. Wilson, in each of these cases, these people believed that there was this like innate attachment to living organisms that humans experience, that there's like this psychological attachment that humans have for life. And what this can look like can actually be very different. So Dr. Hauser earlier had mentioned that for green space, we might think about like growing plants in our house, or having pets in some cases could also kind of be in this realm of biophilia, right? Like loving other forms of life. And so each of these philosophers, ecologists, psychologists, they kind of recognize that humans have some sort of attachment to living organisms. Now, E.O. Wilson, in his book Biophilia, took this even further. And he said that humans have evolved a need to connect with nature and spend time outdoors. So he actually kind of asserts that we need this, that humans have evolved this need to connect with nature. Like we are innately needing to interact with green space and nature and outside. And since then, he's talked a lot about how we become very stressed when we separate ourselves from nature. So when we shut ourselves indoors with artificial lighting and artificial furniture, that actually causes us to have stress and stresses us out. Whereas like going back to nature is really the way that humans have evolved. Um, It's a little bit controversial in some cases, but there's even been scientists since E.O. Wilson that have talked about how there's likely a genetic basis for this, maybe, um, because they'll talk about how biophilia would be advantageous for human survival. So, for example, if you were a person who needed to go out into the woods to find plants for medication, being able to connect to nature, remember what those plants looked like, and find them would actually be beneficial to your survival. So there's lots of arguments out there about biophilia that say, there may be a genetic basis and it might have been subjected to natural selection evolution because it would provide an advantage to humans. If biophilia does interest you, I discovered that the E.O. Wilson book is actually available as an ebook through our library. I went and checked out a hard copy of it from the Portsmouth campus library. There's also a copy at the Norfolk campus library. Uh, and it's a really interesting read where he talks about how he kind of developed this idea. And again, he's an ecologist, so he studied a lot of different interactions between organisms. But he really kind of makes this assertion that humans have this need too. We need to connect with nature. We need to spend time outdoors. So what I wanted to do next is a breakout room discussion. I know there's just a few of us here, but I'm hoping maybe we can do a couple of breakout rooms to talk about this issue. And what I wanted to talk about is, do we think biophilia exists? Do we think, yeah, that's probably real, or maybe not? And then my other question that I wanted you to talk about is, how could we leverage biophilia to protect green space? So if one of the things that we're here to talk about today is humans and our interaction with nature and green space, how could we actually leverage biophilia to help protect green space? So I'm going to just create a couple of breakout rooms. I'll probably just do two because there's 6 of us with Dr. Hauser and I included. Okay, why is my breakout room? There it is. Okay. And we'll give you guys a few minutes just to kind of talk through this about, is biophilia something that you think is real? And then how could we use biophilia to help protect green spaces? Okay, so we had a really good discussion there about biophilia and our love of living organisms. Now, the next thing that I wanted to talk about here is something else. And I'll confess to you guys, I am more familiar with Christianity, specifically Catholicism, with this because I went to a Catholic undergraduate university. But there's lots of discussion about how with biophilia, this idea of love of life and love of nature, that the world's religions have actually recognized this, and that the major world religions actually are kind of based in loving and taking care of the environment. So within Christianity, there's a lot of discussion back and forth about the story of creationism and whether that story says have dominion over the earth, or whether it could be more interpreted to we have a responsibility to care for the earth. And there are a couple of different Bible verses that do refer to this care that we should have for the earth and living things. So there's lots of discussion about this as well. Does this say we should have dominion over the earth and dominate it, or do we have a responsibility to care for it? And I think, we all may have our own opinions about this, but just based on the conversations I heard about biophilia, it sounds like a lot of us think that the care piece is probably the more important part. Another thing that I always found really interesting related to Christianity and Catholicism specifically about taking care of the earth and this responsibility that we have to nature and green spaces is that Pope Francis within the Catholic Church actually made it a sin to knowingly pollute the environment. And I remember this very vividly because I was very excited. In the Catholic faith, the Pope can make these announcements, right? And it was a big step forward that he actually said, knowingly polluting the environment is bad news and we shouldn't do that. So there's that for Christianity. Islam, there's actually 750 ecological principles that can be applied to taking care of the environment. So there's been lots of discussion about how the Quran actually really promotes taking care of the environment with all of these different principles that it asserts. Judaism, within the Jewish faith, they actually have an environmental ethic where the Torah prohibits wasteful consumption. So this whole ethic behind a lot of it is you shouldn't waste, you shouldn't just consume, don't be excessive, and that we should view our place, we should view our place in creation with love and awe, as this article that I was reading was talking about. Hinduism also asserts this respect for life and the environment. And of course, Buddhism, we probably would be really familiar with, right? That we should live in harmony with nature and we shouldn't try to control it. So within biophilia, actually the major world religions do sort of promote this, right? And it's really Christianity where there's the dominion piece that some folks will argue, but a lot of these really kind of promote biophilia and being responsible and taking care of the environment.
Okay, so I am going to be talking about some other ideas that coincide with green space and some of the benefits of incorporating green space and having that time with nature, if it is, again, the plants that you like to garden with or going to the beach. So there's been some research about the benefits of green space in relationship to health and recreation. So people who live in communities with abundant green space tend to have better health. Even if you spend time outside, the more time that you are outside, you can have, again, better health, chance to reduce obesity. They did a study where they compared people who took time to do meditative walking versus athletic walking. And again, any type of walking is great outside, but they found that those individuals who did the more meditative walking and moving through green space had less stress, less frustration, increased happiness, and even workers who had a view of nature, like if you have a window in your office or you're doing your schoolwork with access to a window, that they were better able to complete their tasks and had higher job satisfaction. There was another study that talked about people who lived in public housing, and if those individuals again had trees nearby, then they were more able to deal with potentially stressful life situations. So there's lots of benefits to just sort of mental wellness as well as overall physical health. And the more time that you can spend outside, the more times that you can frequent those green spaces, even if it is, again, watering your plants in your backyard, that's going to have a direct relationship and a direct benefit. Okay, next slide. So I tried to brainstorm, local recreational green space opportunities. We had the mention of the beach earlier. There's lots of local city parks that you can go onto their websites and they will tell you about what they have available at the parks all over Hampton Roads. I also thought of Norfolk Botanical Gardens, which are beautiful and good to walk around to get that connection with nature. But I'm sure that you could also think of other ones. I know that I live pretty close to downtown Norfolk, and I've been seeing that, like in the Neon District, they're doing like outdoor free yoga sessions, for example, right? So yeah, you're in a more urban environment, but you're still outside and have that opportunity to connect with nature. So we had the prompt earlier about, just thinking about green space in general and how you might have connected with outdoor activities. Anybody want to share maybe in the chat, or you can just speak up if there's some place. I think we're going to do a whiteboard activity here, sorry. So brainstorming a green space that's close to you, that, in Hampton Roads that you visit, that you would recommend to us, someplace new that we could check out. And if you're able to, you know, explain to us, like, what do you do there? Is it someplace that you just like to sit, or is it someplace that you bicycle, or there's lots of different things that you know. I'm spending a lot of time in green space walking my dogs, so that's probably my main activity.
Okay, so
Yep, there are lots of neighborhood parks, Mia. That's a great option. I've been doing a fair amount of bicycling myself. It's been pretty windy the past couple of days, but yeah, just spending time in the backyard now that it's cooled off a little bit. Yeah, I can definitely try to share with you about the outdoor yoga opportunities. They are in, oh, Mia's already found it, 6 o'clock. Yes, go check it out. I've heard good things about it. I personally have not done it, but I've heard from other people that it's really good, so. Okay, well, thank you for sharing and participating in our whiteboard. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the benefits. And again, there's lots of opportunities to participate and experience green space around us. Something that Dr. Forgey and I definitely talk about in our environmental science class is the carbon footprint. And you can see the definition there. It talks about how many greenhouse gases are generated by our actions. And here in the United States, our carbon footprint on average is much higher than the global average, and we are starting to feel more and more impacts from global climate change with our, you know, all the hurricanes and the forest fires. And if we want to try to combat global climate change, scientists are saying the best chance is to try to lower the average global carbon footprint to about 2 tons per year, which sounds like quite an undertaking. But there are ways that we can think about our carbon footprint and maybe reduce our greenhouse gas impact by thinking about it in relationship to green space. So that's what I wanted to talk a little bit about on the next slide. So if we want to think about, you know, we can absolutely drive less miles and try to carpool, but in relationship to green space, since that's our focus, if you can eat local, grow your own garden, or find resources that that are local, then you are reducing transportation, and so that will help to lower. Eating local for 1 year saves greenhouse gases that would take about the same amount to drive 1,000 miles. So that's a decent amount of savings. We were talking a little bit about with the religion, you know, reducing waste, only using what you need. On average, Americans waste about 40% of the food that they buy, and that's a lot. So we can, again, reduce that by being creative with our leftovers, even, you know, skipping on disposable dishes and just washing your dishes and your silverware, using compostable things if you can. And then that also takes us to the recycling piece. There's about 288 million tons of trash each year that are produced, and 169 million tons end up in landfills. So if we can try and reduce that by, again, maybe composting or trying to recycle the materials that can be recycled, reusing even electronics, donating old clothes to thrift stores. All of those things can help so that we're not putting more stuff into the landfill. That will promote our keeping of green space. And then if we can plant more trees, right, that will take up the greenhouse gases. But doing that around your house, trees and shrubs act like a natural insulation, and that can help to reduce your electricity bills and your energy bills as well. So just some ideas about carbon footprint kind of related to green space specifically. Moving on, if you want to spend more time in nature in addition to, you know, yoga and walking your dogs and bicycling and spending time at the beach, there are some volunteer opportunities that are starting back up locally in the Hampton Roads area. With COVID, a lot of them were on hiatus for some time, but I was happy to see that some of them are back in effect with, you know, social distancing and asking you, like I was looking at the Paradise Creek Nature Park that is pretty close to TCC Portsmouth campus, where Dr. Forgey and I are based out of, and we have definitely taken our students there for environmental science related labs. And so 2 Saturdays a month in the morning, they have sort of volunteer days where they are looking for volunteers. And I was looking and they're asking, you know, if you can wear your mask and like bring your own tools if you have them, like for, you know, clippers or something like that. A lot of times they're trying to get rid of like invasive plants and things like that. And then there's lots of, again, I'm trying to be broader here since this is for all of Hampton Roads, but I just found this, the askhrgreen.org, and they have listed on that website there lots of local cleanup and recycling events that, you know, if you do have electronics that you would like to get rid of, you could take them there instead of just putting them out in your regular trash for a landfill. But they're doing lots of local things in, you know, different cities in the area. So I thought that that would be a good resource if you guys wanted to check it out, rather, because I wasn't quite sure where everybody would be hailing from who is joining us today. But definitely check it out if, again, you want to spend some more time outside and then have that positive impact on the environment.
With that, Lynette, I just wanted to add the Elizabeth River Project does all kinds of volunteer events as well, even beyond Paradise Creek. So they're a great resource, Paradise Creek specifically, but they do other events kind of all around the Elizabeth River as well.
Yeah, the Elizabeth River actually just is starting some new headquarters that is close to where I live in Norfolk, which I'm really excited about. There's also like a new shop that is like local plants that you can buy and you know, plant in your backyard. So there's lots of local stuff that you can find out about, again, with online resources, or reach out to Dr. Forgey or I. That's why we put our email addresses on there in case we can be of further assistance as you want to try to connect with green space and try to be environmentally friendly in this time of COVID when we are virtual, but there's still lots of ways that we can connect. I think we're at the point that if anybody has any more questions or comments, feel free to type in the chat or turn off your mic and say, hey, we'd love to hear from you. If not, that's okay too. Yep, there are all our resources if you want to check them out. To get involved with the Paradise Creek, you can go to their website and you can sign up through their website. Well, I want to thank Student Activities for inviting us and asking us to do this presentation. I always enjoy the opportunity to talk, you know, more not in, I mean, it's still academic, but right, like not, we're going to test you and all this stuff afterwards. So kind of nice to take a different turn on it. We have some idea about spring schedule if people are interested in taking environmental science. I'm teaching the first part of environmental science, which is ENV 121. I have I think 2 16-week sections, and then I have a second 8-week section. So a couple different modalities to help. And then Dr. Forgey, you can share what you're teaching.
So I teach environmental 2, which is a lot of like that overlap between sociology and science. And I'm offering a section of it that's 8 weeks in the first 8 weeks of spring semester, but you actually don't have to take 121 before you take 122 either. So some students don't realize that because it's environmental 1 and then environmental 2, you don't have to take them in order. You can jump into either section.
And they will be virtual for spring as well. So even if you're not a regular Portsmouth campus student, you can absolutely sign up for one of our classes and hang out with us on Canvas and on
So
Zoom.
Mia asked what we majored in, Lynette. So I have a bachelor's and master's that are just in like general biology technically, but I studied plant ecology. And with ecology, you study a lot of like soil science and hydrology, where we learn about water movement. And I actually taught environmental science for ODU for a couple of years when I was there as a grad student. So that's kind of what sparked my interest a lot in the environmental science aspects of biology. Um, Dr. Hauser's a little bit different than me, though, in her.
Right. So I have an undergraduate degree in biology with a concentration in environmental science, and then my master's degree is in environmental science with a concentration in aquatic ecology. And so I was looking, I did some research. I also did plant research, but I like sort of the aquatic aspect of it. And I love research, but I always knew that I wanted to be an educator. I come from a family of educators, and so I love teaching. Who knows what I might do in the future, but I was always very passionate about the environment. My parents teased me when I was growing up. I always said that I wanted to work at SeaWorld and play with the dolphins. And so, I love teaching about the environment. And so, yeah, and I'm very fortunate that TCC has been supportive of the coursework that Dr. Forgey and I have implemented. So.
I was just going to say I should have known too from when I was a little girl and made my sisters sit through summer school in my crabapple orchard that I would grow up to be a teacher someday.
Tidewater Community College is definitely blessed to have both of you as instructors here.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say.
That is. We both love our work at TCC, that's for sure.